want to state your name, please?
Sure, I'm David Brewer. I represent the Friends of Rickwood Field.
All right, and can you spell your last name?
Brewer.
Perfect. David, can you go ahead and tell me a little bit about what you do here with the Friends of Rickwood Park?
Sure. I have the good fortune of being employed by the Friends of Rickwood Field. I'm the sole employee of the Friends organization. We are the nonprofit group that works in partnership with the City of Birmingham, who is the owner of, excuse me, the owner of the facility. We are responsible for the management, the restoration, the overall revitalization of the ballpark. And so our role includes the fundraising, the scheduling, the marketing, the implementation of the actual care and restoration of the physical structure as well.
Thank you. Can you also tell me a little bit about your educational background, how it kind of falls into what you're doing now?
Sure. My academic training is as a social historian. I have an undergraduate degree and a master's degree in American history from UAB. Several years ago, it's been quite a few years, when I was in graduate school, I wanted to do something in the field of history, but I did not see myself as a traditional university academic. In other words, I didn't have aspirations of being going into a PhD program and being a university academic. But I did want to do something with history, utilizing my new degree at that time. And so I would envision myself as a curator or a steward of a historic site, perhaps an archivist, playing a role in archives, something along those lines. And so I ended up here as an employee of the Friends of Rickwood, and in those terms, it's worked out pretty well.
Can you also tell me a little bit about the history of this ballpark? Not necessarily the players, but just the ballpark in general.
Sure. The ballpark opened in August of 1910, and so 2 years ago we celebrated the ballpark centennial. The National Park Service recognizes Rickwood Field as America's oldest baseball park, and we've used that as our primary marketing and fundraising angle. The park was built by a gentleman named Rick Woodward, and that's from where the name of the ballpark comes. The park was first and foremost the home field for the Birmingham Barons, and served as such from 1910 until 1987, when they left here and moved to a suburban ballpark. The park also served as the home field for the Birmingham Black Barons, beginning in 1920 and continuing until 1963, when the Black Barons fielded their final team. The ballpark, the teams that played here, were segregated through 1963. The first integrated team was fielded here in 1964. The park also served as a frequent host for barnstorming major league teams, traveling teams, and so those teams playing here at Rickwood provided the Birmingham baseball public an opportunity to see Major League Baseball as well. Birmingham has never been a major league town, and so those traveling teams provided that opportunity. The combined use of the park by the Black Barons, the Barons, their opponents, and the major league clubs who played here and their opponents, all that combined, there are over 100 members of the Baseball Hall of Fame that played at Rickwood Field. I think the number is actually 108. That's over a third of the total membership of the Baseball Hall of Fame. So in terms of baseball history, that's pretty significant for a minor league town. As a social historian, I would argue that Rickwood played a role beyond just straight baseball, in terms of, beyond just the notion of who hit the most home runs or who won the pennant any given year. Ballparks play a role in shaping community identity and contributing to civic pride, and certainly Rickwood played that role for both Caucasian residents who came to see their heroes, but African American Birmingham residents who also came here to see their heroes. And so in those terms, ballparks play that role of becoming a cultural center, a place around which a community rallies and then identifies itself. And so civic identity, community pride, cultural identity, that is, in my view, perhaps the most significant chapter of the Rickwood history, the Rickwood story.
I also remember just a little while ago, before we really got into this interview, you would tell me about management of the Rickwood field and how there was a separation between the Birmingham Barons and the Birmingham Black Barons, and the idea wasn't to kind of show progression, of integrating baseball with having blacks or any colored players with whites on the same field, but it was more of a business aspect. Can you go a little into detail about that?
Absolutely. As I said earlier, the ballpark was built first and foremost as the home field for the Birmingham Barons. The team owner, the park builder, Rick Woodward, was a member of a wealthy industrialist family here in Birmingham, the Woodward family. They owned the Woodward Iron Company. They were among the social and industrial elite. Mr. Woodward, the reason you own a baseball team, aside from your love of the game, is to make money. And so when Rick Woodward's Birmingham Barons were traveling, when they were playing away, his new ballpark is sitting here empty. And again, he's in the business of generating revenue. And so he entered into a business relationship with the Birmingham Black Barons to allow them to use Rickwood Field, essentially for Rickwood to serve as their home park as well. They always played, their schedule was contingent on availability of the ballpark. In other words, the White Barons received scheduling priority. When they were on the road, the park was made available to the Birmingham Black Barons. This relationship that Rick Woodward and subsequent ownership of the park entered into with the Black Barons was a business decision. It was driven by economics. It was not some sort of forward-thinking, progressive social experiment. It was purely driven by economics. In other words, you generate revenue by renting your ballpark. And so that was the genesis of that relationship.
Can you kind of tell me about when was the first time Rick Woodward really wanted to kind of get away from the business and create integration with baseball?
Well, park ownership and team ownership had changed hands by 1964. Mr. Woodward was deceased at that point. He had passed away. He had sold the ownership of both the team and the ballpark. And so it was subsequent owners who ultimately were involved in the integration of Rickwood Field. That occurred in 1964. The first integrated team took the field here in 1964. The facility itself had previously been segregated as well. In other words, when the Negro League teams were playing, the grandstands were full of African American fans exclusively. And the same is true for when the White Barons were playing. The grandstand would have been seating for Caucasian fans. And so prior to 1964, both the teams and the facility itself were segregated, as were all public facilities in Birmingham prior to 1964.
Can you kind of tell me a little bit about how it was, or how did players react when segregation finally occurred, when colored players kind of came into the ballpark playing with whites?
In terms of the players themselves and how they, how receptive they were to this notion of integration, we have several ways of kind of arriving at that concept. There are former ball players still living, both Caucasian and African American ball players who are involved in that integration. And we know from them that, perhaps surprisingly, that transition went very smoothly from a ball player standpoint. We know from reading the newspapers that the overall transition, the integration of Birmingham, was not necessarily a smooth and peaceful process. But at the ballpark, that process does seem to have been have gone more smoothly than the overall integration of the town, of the city. In addition to just straight newspaper accounts, we have accounts of the games themselves, you know, the sports page, and this concept of integration was covered and spoken to by the sports writers of the time. The grandstand itself, as I said, it was integrated at the same time. We know both from firsthand account and also from newspaper coverage that this new concept of African American and Caucasian fans sitting together, that went smoothly here at Rickwood Field as well. And so I'm not sure what the explanation is. Perhaps it's oversimplifying it to just say the love of the game overshadowed any other concerns. I'm not sure that that's the explanation. Nonetheless, the integration here at Rickwood Field was a relatively smooth process.
That's actually interesting to see, coming from the South.
Sure.
Being in the South, you really don't see that.
Yeah,
it's kind of late on integration alone as it is compared to many other states.
Oh, absolutely. Well, and you bring up a good point, and using baseball again kind of as the reference point. Jackie Robinson integrated Major League Baseball in 1947. It occurred in Birmingham at Rickwood Field in 1964. So some years later, change occurs more slowly perhaps here in the Deep South. But nonetheless, the transition here at the ballpark did seem to go relatively smoothly, and certainly more smoothly than it did overall.
Can you tell me about, are there any specific stories or incidents that you've heard about where colored athletes kind of struggled on the field or off the field with fans or with players?
Well, if we're speaking about the post-integration years, we could talk about, most baseball fans are familiar with a guy named Reggie Jackson. Reggie Jackson is an iconic baseball figure, but I think you could argue to some degree sort of just an iconic American cultural figure as well. Reggie Jackson was on the 1967 Birmingham A's team here at Rickwood Field. So that's several years after this point of integration. But I know from firsthand accounts that he did experience or sense a little bit of